I do not consider myself to be an expert or a professional when it comes to Photoshop. I don't at all. In fact, I have a very strong belief in your ability to become a professional at something is only equal to your ability or your willingness to continue to learn and never consider yourself a professional. So I do not consider myself a professional at all. But if I had to pick one software that I was most comfortable with, or a software that I was most confident in my ability to teach with, it would 100% be Photoshop. On top of this, everything that I've learned in Photoshop has been entirely self-taught, and a lot of the tips that I'm going to teach you today were learned through complete trial and error. Were learned simply by me sitting down in front of Photoshop with a project in front of me and figuring out a solution to the question that I was asking. So if you do know any better ways or more efficient ways to do any of the tips that I'm going to teach you today, don't feel like you're going to hurt my feelings by leaving them in the comments below. I would actually really appreciate if you could leave them in the comments below. Hopefully it'll teach someone watching this video that wants to go down and look in the comments something, or it might just teach me something. So if you do have a better way of doing anything that I cover today, don't feel like you're gonna hurt my feelings, leave them in the comments below. Last week I posted a video titled 10 Lightroom tips everyone needs to know, and I really enjoyed making it, and funnily enough, you guys seem to really enjoy it too. So today I really wanted to bring you guys the sequel to 10 Lightroom tips and bring you guys 10 Photoshop tips that everyone needs to know. But here's the issue. I couldn't keep it to 10 tips. In fact, I wrote out a list of about 40 tips. I cut that list to 25 in the hope that I would be able to make it into one long video. But I finished recording it, looked at the time code, and it said 55 minutes. And I sat back and I was like, oh, okay, we're not gonna do 25 tips because I don't want to post a video that's 40 to 50 minutes long. So I've cut this list down to 15 pure essential tips that I think anyone can use, from beginners to advanced on Photoshop, that covers a range of things from, little hacks and tricks that you can use with certain tools to really creative ideas that you can begin to use in all your edits. So without further ado, sit down, grab a drink, grab something to eat, open Photoshop, and we'll get into tip number one. We're gonna start with this one because this one absolutely blew my mind the first time I found out about it, and that is content aware scale. I know, I had no idea it existed for the longest time, and it was staring at me right in the face. So to do this, I'm gonna use this image here that I used for a thumbnail a while back. Now, I like this image, but say I want to resize it so there's just a little bit more room to add some copy, or maybe I want my 1DX to be the centerpiece. Right now it's a little bit lower in the bottom half of the image. I want it to be a little bit better. So what I can do here is I can go over to the crop tool. I can change that ratio to 16:9 and select content aware. From here, what I can do is I can drag this out and I can drag this down slightly so it adds a little bit more to the image, resize, and then if I hit enter, Photoshop will work its magic in the background, do its thing, and produce this. Now this is the before, this is the after. It's done an okay job. Now if I, went in and refined these edges a little bit, it's added some texture down here, it stretched these out, I could maybe go ahead and add that line all the way to the end. But if I'm using that for a thumbnail, or I'm posting it online where the resolution isn't gonna be as high, then that's done a fantastic job at adding a little bit more to the image without me having to go in manually and paint it in or stretching it out or doing any of that sort of stuff. Tip number 2 is perfect for me, especially for editing portraits. I like to edit my portraits with my Wacom Intuos tablet. Now I'm left-handed, which means that I feel very comfortable painting away from my hand. That's just what feels very natural for me. So if I turn this on, and I go over here, and say for example I want to paint over here under Maddie's eyes. It's very unnatural for me to paint in that direction. I want to get my frame in a position where I can paint in a very natural movement. To do this, all you're going to do is you're going to hit R on your keyboard. That'll bring up the rotation option, and then all you can do is rotate that image around to where you want it, and then paint away at an angle that feels more natural. Once you're done painting, all you're gonna do is double click here. That'll reposition that image straight back to the start. Tip number 3 is how you rotate the clone stamp tool. Now, have you ever been using the clone stamp tool and you just wished you had a little bit more control? You could rotate, you could move it around, or you could sample from one area and then mirror it over on the other side. Well, apparently you can. I know, this blew my mind as well the first time I found out about it. What you're gonna do here is, say for example with this image of Maddie here, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna create a merged layer by holding Shift, Option, Command E. For here, what I wanna do is I wanna get rid of this highlight over here. I'm not really loving the way it's adding to the eye. It's just distracting me a little bit. Now, what I could do is I could sample from maybe over here. I could maybe try and recreate it with a paintbrush, but a really easy way to do it is what you're gonna do is you're gonna go over to this option over here, and then you're gonna change the angle option over here to 180. And what that's gonna do is it's going to rotate your sample image by 180 degrees, meaning that if I go over here and I sample this side of the eye, and then I go over here to this side of the eye, you'll notice that it's sampling it from the opposite direction. And I can go over here again, I can sample from up here at a little bit of a smaller size, and then bring that down here, and that way I can begin to get rid of that highlight in a more natural way. Admittedly, I wouldn't actually do this in real life. I really like the look of the highlight, but you can imagine how that effect or this technique can begin to be really, really useful for adding more control to the clone stamp tool. Just remember to change it back to 0 once you finish using it, because Photoshop can get confusing if you forget to put your tools back where you found them. If you want to know what your image is looking like as far as this sample image, all you need to do is draw in this slider and that'll automatically give you an overlay of what it's doing. So that gives you an idea of what this technique is actually doing. Tip number 4 is hold the control and option keys to quickly change the brush size. How many times have you been in Photoshop and you've been brushing away and you've realized that your brush is a little bit too big or a little bit too soft, and you're like, oh, well, screw it, I've got to go over here. I've got to change the size. It's not right. Change it a little bit more. Not right. Damn. All right, now I've got to change the hardness. It's just like, it's annoying. It's really, really annoying, isn't it? So what you need to do to change this and change this on the fly is you can go ahead over here and you can hold the control and option keys and then click down and go from left to right to change the size, and up and down to change the hardness of your brush. All the way down to go to 100%. All the way up to go to 0, and then all the way to the left and all the way to the right. It's a really, really easy way to change the size of your brush on the fly. Alternatively, what I like to use, it's a really, really easy one, is just use the bracket keys, the left and right bracket keys to change the size. Because I'm left-handed again, it's far easier for me to use the bracket keys with my right and then draw with my left. Tip number 5 goes from the last one, and that's holding the control, option, and command keys down and then clicking on the brush to change your color on the fly. So this, simply by holding down the brush, you can go over here. Let's say I want to add a blue into her eyes. Let's go down here a little bit lower, bring it back over here. Selected, I change the brush tool with the options that I've just learnt. Let's go down, let's get a nice soft brush. And then just like that, I can go in and paint over her eyes, adding a little bit of blue to the image. It's just 2 little ways that you can really begin to speed up your workflow. And if you're editing as much as I am, if you're editing as many videos and images a week as I am, anything that you can do to speed up this process, anything you can do to make it just a tiny bit faster is going to help you tenfold. Tip number 6 is how you can start to use blend modes to add different effects to your images. Say for example with this self-portrait that I've got over here. For whatever reason, I'm feeling a little bit narcissistic or weird. I'm feeling a little bit weird and I want to add my name to the image just in case people forget that it's me, you know, as you do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here. I'm going to add this piece of text over here to my image, this poorly drawn, quickly written piece of text. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to add this to my self-portrait. I'm going to go Command V to add that image to the portrait, and then I'm going to bring this to the top. But the issue here is it's got a black background. It's not a PNG. All I need to do is go over here to the blend modes and change that to screen. And what that's going to do is it's going to get rid of all the dark spots and leave the highlights of the image. But say for example, if I want to add, you know, over here, the highlights on my nose are completely getting rid of the text and it doesn't look too good. What if I want to add a black piece of text with a white background? Well, it's the same process. All you're going to do is you're going to add that to your image, and then you're going to go over and instead of selecting screen, you're going to select multiply. And what that'll do is the exact opposite of the screen blend mode and get rid of the highlights in your image and leave the shadows of the image. Now, this is the simplest way that you can use this technique, but I use screen and multiply for just about every single one of my edits. Say for example, I want to add an overlay of a flare, and the flare has a dark background and it's progressively getting lighter. Or say for example, I want to add a jellyfish like I've done in this edit here. Rather than just having those inserted into the image and then having to cut them out and then having to use, you know, feathering and that sort of stuff to make it look natural, I can simply throw a screen blend mode onto that image and straight away it starts to look a lot more natural. It's also a really cool technique that I used in this image here, which allows me to create a nice hologram effect in my images. It's a really, really cool technique. So if you are wanting to start adding things to your images, this is the perfect way to start. Tip number 7 is dodging and burning. Say for example, you want to dodge and burn your image. You want to add a little bit more oomph to the image, but you don't have 2, 3, 4 hours to individually go in and paint every single brush stroke, to add highlights over here and add shadows over the side of my face. I just want to do it quickly. I don't have all the time in the world. I'm just a hobbyist. Well, there's a really, really simple way you can do this. What you want to do, you want to make 2 copies of your complete edit up until that point. What you can do to do this is, again, like I said before, Shift, Option, Command E. Once you've done that, you're going to change this to screen. That'll make your image look really blown out. If it does, that's okay. What you're going to do next is you're going to duplicate that layer and you're going to change this one to multiply. Once you've done that, what you can do here is you're going to get rid of your multiply layer. You're going to go over here, you're going to right click and you're going to go over to blending options. From here, what you want to do is you want to start to remove the shadows of this layer without removing the highlights. And to do this, you're going to go over to this here and the underlying layer. What this means is how much of the layer beneath is being revealed and how much of this layer is remaining. So I want to take away the shadows. So I'm going to pull from the left-hand side. You'll see that the shadows are beginning to be removed from this particular layer. Once I'm at a point I'm happy with and I want to start feathering, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Option and I'm going to drag that feather out to a point where those highlights aren't too blown out, but they're still very obvious. The next step is you're going to do the exact same thing for your multiply layer. So you're going to right click, go to blending options, and this side you're going to pull from the right hand side. So I'm going to pull from this side over here. I'm going to bring this over. I'm going to feather from here. So I'm just going to bring this in and I'm going to hit OK. Now again, this is looking weird, but I'm going to go and I'm going to group these layers. I'm going to name this D and B for dodge and burn. I'm then going to go ahead and I'm going to add a mask to this layer. Make sure the mask is selected. And then I'm going to go over to image, apply image, and then the default settings should be fine, but you can play around with the blending modes if you want to. I like the add one. It's looking fine to me. I'm going to press OK. That'll go through its Photoshop magic once again. And then this is the finished product. Now it's still looking crazy, but it's looking better than it was without the mask. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over to the opacity and I'm going to bring this down to about 55%. Now, if I go ahead and turn this layer off and on, it's a little bit intense still, so I'm going to bring this down actually to about 30% here. If I turn this off and on, that's added a nice even amount of dodging and burning to this image. Now, if I wanted to say the highlights are a little bit too intense, what I can do is I can go in and individually bring those highlights down, or maybe I want to increase the shadows, so I'll duplicate that layer and bring it down slightly. Whatever gets done within this mask is not going to influence anything outside of this mask. So this is a really, really good technique that you can start to add a little bit of dodging and burning to your image. One, without having to do it locally. So it's a whole adjustment of your image. You don't have to go in individually and paint in those highlights and shadows. You can start to add it to your entire image all at once. And it's also a lot faster than local dodging and burning if you just don't have the time to dodge and burn your images. But alternatively, for tip number 8, how I actually dodge and burn is what I do is I go to the top layer of my image. I'll go over to layer, I'll go to new layer, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a linear light layer. I'm going to fill it with 50% gray and I'm going to bring the opacity down to about 40%. I'm going to name this layer dodge and then I'm going to press OK. I'm going to duplicate this layer and I'm going to name the second one burn. For this, I'm just going to group them together just for my own organization. I'm going to name this dodge and burn local. And then within these layers, the dodge, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to select the dodge tool. I'm going to make sure that the exposure is at about 2 to 4%. And I'm going to change the range to just highlights and I'm going to go in and paint in individually where I want to add more highlights to the image. Alternatively, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to select the burn tool, again changing the range to mid-tones and then changing the exposure to 2 to 4% and then going over here to burn and individually going in and painting where I want to add shadows to my image. Yes, this process takes a lot longer, but the impact that you can have on your image is substantial. Just for this image alone, if I turn off my dodge and burn layer, you'll see how much oomph that's really added to my image just from a little bit of dodge. I haven't even added a lot of burn to this image yet. It's just dodging, but it's turned her eyes on, it's added some highlights, it's made her look almost a little bit 3D, and it's added some depth to the image. If you're a portrait photographer, or even if you're not a portrait photographer, I use this technique for landscapes as well. well. Take your time and really show some care in your image, and I promise you it's going to make a world of difference. People will notice, even if they don't know exactly what's going on, people will notice that effort that you're putting into your images. Tip number 9 is something that absolutely blew my mind. I found this out about 2 months ago, and that is that you can use the color picker outside of Photoshop. Blew my mind the first time I realized it. Say for example with this image here of Maddie, her eyes are blue, but they're not blue enough. I really want them to be like a rich blue for this image. So what I want to do is I'm going to add a little layer down here that's going to be for her eyes. I'm going to rename this eyes. And then what I want to do is I really like this blue color of my desktop background. But rather than having to go and find this image and then bring it into Photoshop and then sample the color and then use that color on the eyes, what I can do instead, I'm going to select the brush tool. I'm going to hold Alt on my keyboard. I'm going to click to sample the color, and then I'm going to drag out to the area that I want to sample outside of my image. And then once I come back into Photoshop, what you'll notice is that color has been sampled over here from the background. And then what I can do is simply use that color that I've sampled from my background layer. Tip number 10 is how I use blending options to make refinements to my selections, brushes, or objects that I'm adding to my images. It's how I do a lot of the manipulations involved in adding color to my sunsets or making my sunsets appear more vibrant than they actually were in real life. Now the way I actually do that is I use a gradient adjustment layer and then I refine it using the blending options. Now to do this, what you're going to do is you're going to go over here and you're going to add a gradient over here. From here, you're going to click this one here, and I've set mine as a preset, but if you look here, all it is a white, a yellow, an orange, a red, and a gray, all spaced out appropriately. It's really, really easy to make. I might make a whole tutorial on this, but it's very, very simple. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to change the style to radial. I'm going to change this to 135. I'm going to change the scale to about 145. And then I'm going to reposition this right where the sun is on my image. Now from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to press OK, and I'm going to change this to a soft light layer. Now that's really good for adding some nice color to the water. It's also added some nice color to the clouds. But the issue with it here is it looks visibly too intense down here on the sand. The sand's turned into this soft orange color. There's a little bit of banding here on the trees that doesn't look realistic. So what I need to do is I need to refine that selection. Now to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here. I'm going to right click. I'm going to go to blending options, and then I'm going to drag from the left hand side because I want to get rid of these trees a little bit until those trees are outside of the selection. Once I'm done that, I'm going to refine it by holding Alt and Option and dragging that out. What I can also do is I can do a little bit here just to get rid of some of that sand maybe make the sunset pop from outside of that center point and drag that in. And what that's done is if I hit OK and I go back here, it's limited the areas that sunset gradient is impacting, and it's made that gradient look more realistic and blend a lot better with the whole image. Another way that you can use it, say for a portrait, and something that I've done here is if I turn this layer off up here, you'll notice that Maddie's lips are glossy, but they're not super glossy. I want them to pop. Like I want them to look like she's wearing metallic lipstick and it's shining in the light and it looks like it's almost like it's shimmering. So what I want to do here is I'm going to add a layer here by holding Shift Option Command N to create a new layer. I'm going to title this one Lip Gloss, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select a brush. I'm going to change the size to slightly bigger, make sure it's nice and soft, and then I'm going to make sure I'm selected on a white brush. From here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint a little bit of white onto her lips in the areas that I think the gloss would be affecting. So a little bit down here, a little bit down here, a little bit down here. Maybe change the size of that brush again, and then I'm going to add a few little points here. Nice, maybe a point up here, and then just a point. So what I can do now is I'm going to go over here and I'm going to right click. I'm going to go over to blending options, and I'm going to remove from the left hand side slowly to reveal some of those shadows back underneath that white gloss. I'm at a point that I'm pretty happy with, so I'm going to go from here and I'm going to feather that right out to a point that I'm pretty happy with. I like that about there, but that looks pretty good. It looks really glossy. It's a little bit too intense for me at the moment though. So what I can do now is I'm going to change this blending option to soft light or overlay. For this one, I think soft light is the best option. If I turn this off and on, that's perfect. That's added the perfect amount of gloss to the image. And you can do this for just about anything. Say for example here with this little highlight here on her eye, if I add a new layer, I name this one eye highlight or eye catch light, whatever you want to name it. I'm going to go over, I'm going to add a white brush again. I'm going to change my brush size down to a nice soft brush, and I'm just going to add a streak of highlight here, and I'm just going to add a streak of highlight here, and just bring that up here. What I can do now is I'm going to go over here, I'm going to right click, I'm going to go over to blending options, and I'm going to do the exact same thing, removing that highlight slowly just to bring back some of those shadows underneath, and then I'm going to feather that right out to reveal some of those shadows. Now again, if I go back here and I turn that off and on, it looks good, but it's just a little bit too intense for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and I'm going to change that to overlay, I think, for this image. Tip number 11, we're almost there. I know this video is long as hell. Hold Command Option 2 to create a luminosity mask. Now this one's really, really cool. Now if I go over here and I go to the adjustment layers and I add a curves adjustment, and I move this up and down, you'll notice that the mask is immediately added almost like a little picture of Maddie here. And that's because the only thing that this adjustment layer is influencing is the highlights of the image and nothing else. And that's because that luminosity mask has just selected the highlights of the image. And you can begin to realize how powerful this little technique can be for your images. So say for example, if I want to add a little bit of highlights, but then I also want to darken the shadows. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to add another luminosity mask by going Command Option 2, and then I'm going to go over to Selection and Inverse. And now if I go over to the Curves tool now, and I add another one, and I bring this down, you'll notice that it's just affecting the shadows of the image and nothing else. Now this is a really basic example of how you can use this technique, but you can use this for just about anything. You can use it for color, you can use it for dodging and burning, you can use it for adding tone, you can use it for a whole bunch of different techniques. Tip number 12 is using groups to isolate certain areas of your image and make selections. So say if I go over here to this neon Maddie edit where these bright blue lights are looking super powerful and really looking nice. If I go over here to this layer over here, if I turn this off, that's what the color or the lights look like before I've done this. All I've done is I've grouped all of those adjustment layers into one group, and then I've gone and I've thrown a layer mask over the top. So if I turn this layer mask off over here, you'll notice how much that affects the entire image. And if I turn this on over here, you'll notice what's been impacted and what's not. Tip number 14, and this is a huge little secret that I'm letting you guys in on, and it is using the paintbrush tool to paint back some of the hair in some of your selections. So say for example with this image of Maddie, from a distance it looks like that selection is really, really well refined. It's looking nice and detailed. It almost looks like I've individually gone and made sure each of those hair strands is properly selected and properly masked out of the image. But if I zoom into this image, you'll notice that I've actually gone ahead and painted all of these individual hairs back into the image. Now, this is a lot easier than it sounds. If I turn this layer off and on, the one that's the hair, you'll notice how much of a difference that's made to the look of the selection. So if I turn that back on again, that's the before, and that's the after. It's a huge, huge, huge difference. So if I start a new layer over here, let's say if I turn this one completely white over here, and I get a normal brush tool, let's say just a normal size brush, nice and small, maybe about 50% hardness, and I try to paint normal looking hairs with a nice black brush, it doesn't look too realistic. It doesn't really fade out like a natural piece of hair or like a normal pencil. So what I want to do is I'm going to create my own custom brush. So I'm going to go over here to this option over here. I'm going to go to brush settings. I'm going to press shape dynamics. And since I'm using a Wacom tablet and it's connected, I have the option to go ahead and turn pen pressure on. It creates a nice gradient at the end of your brush strokes to create a much more natural look with your brush strokes. For this, I'm going to bring this brush size down, and if I paint now, you'll notice that those brush strokes look a lot more natural and look a lot more like hair. If this was a very, very small piece, those brush strokes look very, very, very natural like their hair. Now if I go over here with a nice small brush, let's have the hair layer selected over here. Let's make sure that the brush tool is selected the way we want it to. And then I'm going to bring this brush size down slightly, bring it down to be nice and soft, even smaller. Let's get it to about there. You're then going to sample the color of the hair that already exists. So holding Option, sample this color here. And then all you need to do is go in and paint back those strokes of hair really, really, really easily to make it look like that selection is more refined, make the selection look more realistic, and from a distance, you cannot tell that that's been done. And the last technique is an absolute game changer for portrait photographers. If you're a portrait photographer out there and you want to learn how to retouch skin, well then this is the tip for you, and that is how to use frequency separation. Now to do this, I'm going to use a picture of me because I have, it's not horrible skin, but it's not the best skin. I want to make it look a little bit smoother. I also don't want to edit someone else's skin on YouTube. I'll put myself to shame, not anyone else. So what I want to do here is I'm going to duplicate this layer here by holding Command J, and I'm going to do that twice. The first one I'm going to title this skin tone, and the second one I'm going to title this texture. And before I move any further forward, the way this works is frequency separation separates the color of your skin and the texture of your skin and allows you to edit those individually. And what that means for your editing process is it means for, say for example, an image like this where I have a beard, it means I can edit the color of my skin underneath the beard without impacting my beard. Or I can edit the blemishes on my skin without impacting the color of my skin. It's a massive game changer for making your retouching look realistic, for making everything look a lot more natural with your portraits rather than just smacking the clone stamp tool on there and hoping it looks okay or not too obvious that you've used that sort of tool. So to do this, like I said, create a skin tone layer and a texture layer. For the skin tone layer, you're going to go over here, you're going to go to Filter, Blur, and Gaussian Blur. And then you're gonna have the blur at about 5. What this is gonna do is it's gonna blur it enough that the textures have begun to disappear from the image. Have it about 5. 5 tends to work for me. Now the next step is you're going to go over to Image. You're gonna go to Apply Image. You're gonna select Invert. You're gonna go here to Skin Tone and make sure the blending option is selected to Add. Once you've done that, you're gonna press OK, and you'll see those textures have started to come out on this particular layer. To bring it back to normal, you're gonna go to Linear Light, and then you're going to group these layers together and title this group. You can title it whatever you want, but I'm going to title it Frequency Separation. And what you'll notice is if I turn this group off and turn it off and on, it's the exact same image, but within this group, I have the textures of my face and I have the colors of my face completely separate. So if I turn this off, the textures get really detailed. If I turn this one off, the textures completely disappear. And what I can do now is I'm going to go over here to my color mixer tool or mixer brush tool. You can copy these up here to make sure your settings all match, but these are settings that I set a while ago and I just keep these settings consistent from portrait to portrait. So once you do this once, you should be able to keep it exactly the same or save it as a preset. And then what I can do is I can go over here, change the size of my brush, and here this highlight fall off on my cheek is a little bit too intense. So what I can do is I can just paint and smoothen out those colors, kind of like I'm smudging the colors together, just to make it look a lot more smooth. For these blemishes up here, I've got a little bit of scarring on the side of my face. I'm not really liking it. I can begin to smooth all of these out. And then here as well, I've got some nice big bags under my eyes. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to smooth out these colors, make that gradual decline into those bags just a little bit less intense and make it a little bit more natural. And from here, if I turn this off and on, it's not a huge change, but it's a nice smoothing of my skin and it makes it look a lot more natural. I can use it for the highlights up here, so make the fall off a little bit less intense. Just painting away, making it look a little bit more natural, piece by piece, piece by piece. And if I turn that on and off again, you'll notice it hasn't made a huge difference. But as far as making my skin look nice and smooth, my skin looking nice and natural at the same time, it's a really, really powerful technique. And then for the texture layer, what you can do is you can go in with the healing brush tool, you can sample an area and you can replace that texture of the image. Say for my blackheads on my nose, maybe I want to get rid of a few of those. I can go in and I can just take textures from other areas and sample them onto here. Say for example, if I want to extend my beard a little bit higher, I can go over here and bring that up, and it's just going to sample the textured areas of the image and not sample the colors. It's a really, really cool technique that you can begin to use on all your portraits. And that's that. Those were my 15 Photoshop hacks that I think everyone needs to know. It's been a long one. It's been a really, really long one. So if you did make it all the way through to the end, first of all, I appreciate you a hell of a lot. But second of all, I really do hope that you did learn something and take something away from this video that you can begin to implement into all your edits from now on, and maybe you can begin to use this video as a reference video that you can continuously come back to and learn new things over and over again every single time you watch it. So if you did learn something new, or if you did enjoy this video or any of the videos on my channel, I would really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. But as always, that's entirely up to you, and I'll see you guys next time.